Well, friends, welcome back. We're in episode 7 of our podcast as we walk through the Gospel of John together. I'm your host, David Dorn, and with Linda O'Donnell. And hope you had a good Easter. I don't know when you're watching this. We just got finished with Easter, and it was a good weekend. It was a good
Great
week, Holy Week. We talked about it a little bit of our practices
Yes,
of Good Friday service was
it was amazing.
one of my favorite services we've had in my 4 years of being here.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very moving night. Even stripping the altar was a powerful
That one makes me
moment.
cry.
Yeah.
That makes me cry, but for good reason.
But today we're backing up the story. We're in John chapter 7, and it's an interesting chapter. It's not one of the heavy hitters when it comes to the stories that you know from Sunday school. In fact, I was rereading some of this going, I know I've read this any number of times, but this is just not the most familiar of the stories out of John's gospel. We're going to jump into it right now. I'll kick things off with verse 1. And again, thank you guys for listening, whether you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify or watching the video on YouTube. We appreciate you. I've gone back through and looked at the views. People are actually watching this with some regularity, Linda.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And anyway, we appreciate you guys hanging out with us. So John chapter 7 says, after this, Jesus went around in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. But when the Jewish festival of Tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, leave Galilee and go to Judea so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. You can hear the facetiousness in their voice, right? Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world. For even his own brothers did not believe in him. Therefore, Jesus told them, my time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that its works are evil. You go to the festival. I am not going up to this festival because my time has not yet fully come. After he had said this, he stayed in Galilee.
Little snarky brothers, huh?
Yeah.
A little snarky. But again, I've got to give him some grace. This is your brother. Perfect Jesus, never gets in trouble. Oh, now he's the Messiah. And I'm sorry, Jesus. I just think of what goes through your mind as a sibling. My younger brother, we always considered him perfect. Kenny never made if he ever watches this, he knows how I feel. Kenny never made mistakes. Kenny never got in trouble. Who does Kenny work for now? The IRS. Just goes to show you. And I think this would be hard, a concept. But when, for them to sit there and say, yeah, come on, do your stuff. It wasn't like, prove yourself. It's like, oh yeah, go on. Come on, show me what you got.
And Jesus had multiple siblings, and different churches treat that in different ways. But I was reading in my personal devotional time. I've been in the Gospel of Mark, and Mark actually named off Jesus's siblings along with his sisters, and he's had a pretty large family. And I know, the Catholic Church, some wings of the Catholic Church maintain the virginity of Mary throughout her life, and say that the siblings were even of immaculate conception as well. I don't think that's there's different theological perspectives even within Catholicism. Obviously, as Methodists, we don't hold to that her and Joseph had children together. Yes. But Jesus had a substantial family, and there was sibling rivalry. We also know that James, who becomes the leader of the church in Jerusalem, was Jesus's brother, and at least at this time was not one who believed in Jesus. And we'll get into it as we get into the cross, but he gives Mary over to John, the disciple who we believe was one of the cousins of Jesus, that he entrusts his mother to John's care because his brothers, which would have been the natural ones to take over, would have been who, just from Jewish custom, would have been the ones responsible for Mary. He gives her off to his cousin because his siblings aren't at the cross. That they have abandoned him in death. And so there's definitely some issues amongst Jesus's siblings. But this, according to the commentaries, this takes place about 6 months after he fed the 5,000. And if you watched last week's podcast, you know that when Jesus is talking about being the bread of life, a lot of his followers left him. They couldn't stomach what he was saying. And Jesus said those things intentionally to kind of whittle down those who were really following him for the right reasons versus just there for free food. And so he's kind of kept a low profile from that point. And he knows that the religious leaders, he's on their radar at this juncture. And so he's tempered his public ministry because the timing is not right. Because there was particular timing to the death of Jesus, and he knew that he had to die at a certain time to fulfill all of the old covenant.
Well, and the festival's coming in. The leaders would know, that Jesus, being a good Jew, would be there. He should be there. I mean, it was what he was supposed to be doing. And so I think Jesus picks and chooses when he goes because he also knows about his safety. So he doesn't go with his brothers. Now, what I love the fact is that he tells them, you go to the festival, you go. And it's almost this release for them. Okay, good. We can leave Jesus behind. We'll go on to the festival. We'll do what we're supposed to do. Jesus, you just do what Jesus does. And I think they go on to the festival, and he comes. You'll see he comes later. But I think he gave them permission to leave. But he does the same thing with us. Again, he winnowed down the followers of his to be the ones that were intentionally wanting to know who he was, and is he who he says he is. And he does the same thing with his brothers. It's like, you know what? Go on if you want. You are free to go. And I think that's a telling for our future, for all of us.
And it's interesting. John points out that the brothers didn't believe him as like that. John does a wonderful job giving commentary throughout the gospel for the reader's sake, that his brothers didn't believe him, but they believed in his following.
Oh, yeah.
They're like, well, why don't you go get more people? You chased everybody off already.
Yes.
Like, you need to go, like, re-get your following again by being in the public sphere. And Jesus is like, no, you don't understand. The world hates me, and I'm trying not to get killed just yet. And he'll have even more conversation throughout John 7 about that and raises the eyebrow of some. But it's interesting. He tells them, yeah, you go on to the festival. I'm not going right now. Some scholars believe a better translation of him saying, I'm not going to the festival and saying, I'm not doing it this year, is I'm not yet going to this festival. Because as soon as the brothers leave, he goes, he just does so in secret to keep a low profile. But Jesus is okay letting people walk away from him. And he doesn't jump through hoops to get people back. The brothers are trying to tempt him in this regard to how big's your following, Jesus? It's kind of gotten low.
Yes.
Your subscriber base has dwindled.
Your likes are going down.
And Jesus isn't buying into the temptation. And Satan comes in many forms to tempt us. Clearly, at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, Jesus was tempted in a variety of ways. Peter tempts him to not go to the cross. His brothers are tempting him to go wave your magic hand and do some more miracles to get the popularity back up. And Jesus isn't buying it. What does that say about popular opinion?
Exactly. Well, most of the time we go against popular opinion by following Jesus. We are called to serve the underserved. We are called to see the hurt. I love when my daughter finishes a prayer, break our heart for what breaks yours, because a lot of times we don't do that. I want to be comfortable, Jesus. I don't want to be uncomfortable.
I've grown to the realization, one, numbers mean something because numbers are representative people, and for people to hear about Jesus is always a good thing. But if there's no substance to getting those numbers, then it is all for naught.
It's all surface.
It's all surface level. And I'm just to a point where I don't care about the surface. I want depth. I leaned over to Ramona on Easter Sunday, and I don't remember what about the leading up to I guess we were showing the video that we showed prior to the service actually starting, and it started off with the nails being driven into Jesus's hands, and And Ramona leaned over. She's like, "Oh, I hope that doesn't offend anybody." Like, because on Easter you're not
Yeah.
thinking Good Friday.
No.
I said, "Well, I hope it does
I
offend
hope
people.
it does.
It needs to be offensive.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be in your face." And I know
Yes.
that caught people off guard, but it's like
It's the reality
it's
of
the
it.
reality of
Mhm.
what we're here to celebrate. He had to die to rise again. We need to acknowledge this. And as we were sitting there, her and I having this conversation, I said, I've just come to the realization, and maybe even look back on my own ministry of some of the ways that I've tried to attract people to church. I said, I'm just over it. I want to talk about Jesus. I want people to fall in love with Jesus, and
Yes.
I'm past the gimmicks. And so much of the modern church is so gimmicky
Yes, it
in
is.
getting people to come to church. And I'm like, I've done all of that. There, you can have the numbers, but if it's not substance, if it's not truly introducing them to the person of Jesus, I'm just past that point.
And we'll never compete with the world
No.
because the world and all their bells and whistles. Does it have substance? No, because there's always the next best Apple Watch, the next best. I'm sorry, should I say a brand? Sorry, the next best watch or next best phone. There's always going to be the next best, and I think we get so caught up in staying ahead that there's no depth to us anymore.
Yeah.
We've stretched ourselves thin, and there's no depth in going into what we truly believe and what will hold value for us.
And I'm not opposed to having fun with it.
No.
But if it's not pointing people to Jesus, I'm just to a point where I don't have time for it. The world needs Jesus so badly.
Yes.
And I was literally moved in having that conversation with her. I'm like, reflecting on my own ministry and the times that I've traded one for the other, and realizing, man, I wish I could have some of that back. It's just not worth it.
No, that's Jesus working on our hearts.
Yeah, and I really think it is. And I was really moved this year with I just want to give all the glory and honor to Him.
Yes. But I think, to me, when I think of our Easter services, all of them, Holy Week, it is that I love the gentle wooing back to Him, drawing us on Holy Thursday, pulling us back into Friday and the darkness of it, because we're drawn to that because we need to see the light. We need to see that. And it's like, if you're coming Friday, make sure you come back Sunday to see the hope. Realize, and I think that is, there's such joy in me when I hear the music, when I hear, the readings on Thursday night, when I hear those things, it's, oh, yes, let's get back to what we know is true, what we know is right. And then again, the year progresses and we lose track again. We fall. And that's just the sadness of it, of how do we stay centered into this? How do we stay close to His side?
And I'm a big fan of intentionality. Jesus chases after the lost. He really does.
Yes.
He is the good shepherd who goes after
leaves
the
the
one.
99.
And, yeah. But we have to want to be found.
Yes.
Because
Well,
Jesus
yeah.
doesn't do it doesn't go where He's not invited. Like the lost have to want to be found.
Yes.
And in this instance, he's saying, I'm not just chasing people to chase them. He goes after those who want to be found. We see that story
Yes.
repeated over and over again, but He's not doing the gimmicky thing just to get people back.
No.
They have to want to lean into Him. And that
Oh.
was kind of why He said the things that He did to whittle them down.
Yes. Because if you're intentionally seeking Him for self-serving purposes, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
It's not.
You want to pick up in verse 10?
Sure. However, after his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. Now at the festival, that the Jewish leaders were watching for Jesus and asking, "Where is He?" Among the crowds, there was a widespread whispering about Him. Some said, "He is a good man." Others replied, "No, he deceives the people." But no one would say anything publicly about Him for fear of the leaders.
So he did go up to the festival. He did go in secret as to not trigger the religious leaders' watchful eye. But some people are charging that His teaching is deceiving the people, which Deuteronomy actually talks about deceiving prophets, and you need to test them. And Jesus would have passed the test as one to not be deceiving of them based on the Old Testament.
Well, for this to be the festival of Tabernacle, I love to read. I love to dive into this. And the Festival of the Tabernacle, because I want to make sure I got it right, they hit on four things, because it's all about after the 40 years in the desert for the Israelites. And it's like that it's celebrating unity, gratitude, dependence on God, and hope. Those are the four things it celebrates. And I think, hello, this is Jesus. This is Jesus. He is the fulfillment of that, of what they come there to celebrate this and to be reminded of it. But I'm like, don't miss it. He's standing right in front of you. This is, because I think he is, that all of this was Jesus' intent. We are God-centered, and that our dependence is on God. Our hope is in him. And I think, and then the unity, this is for everyone. This wasn't just for an exclusionary few. It's for everyone who wanted it, everyone who came into communion with him. And they had to come in with him. But I think it's just so weird to think of him coming in to this party, and really he is the party. He is the main point of the party. And they're still like, deceiver. And I'm like, are you so set on those traditions, so set on celebrating that in the past, which there's nothing wrong with that you're missing the salvation of your future because he's standing right in front of you?
Yeah. They ended up worshiping the process instead of the person.
Yes.
But his name spreads like wildfire throughout the crowd. And I think we get lost on, we see things trending on social media or in the news where it's like, gosh, it's all we talk about.
Yes.
Like that is what took place then. And to realize the religious leaders that he's a threat to them in their way of life and the way that they've established the religious order, because that's all anybody can talk about. That's so much power is just
that's their authority. Is that is their authority.
Verse 14 says, not until halfway through the festival did Jesus go up to the temple courts and begin to teach. The Jews there were amazed and asked, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? Which makes me wonder what happened halfway through. That Jesus is like, all right, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm just going to go up there and teach it myself. Maybe they were some really bad teachers that week, and Jesus is like, all right, take the coat off and let me do my thing. Verse 16, Jesus answered, my teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teachings come from God or whether I speak on my own. Whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory. But he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is a man of truth. There is nothing false about him. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me?
Threat. In the temple courts, it's like there's no secret anymore. That is a crowded area. And to come there, you had to know, as soon as they realized who that was, that a hush came over the crowd, and they would see him and realize, whoa, it's Jesus. He's here. And I imagine the fervor that happened it's like you're coming there undercover, but then again, what was the catalyst that caused him to say enough? Was it false teachings within the temple courts? Were they keeping people out of it? We don't see this, but there could have been all kinds of circumstances that kept people from coming in. And he might have said, enough.
And so it's helpful to understand how rabbis at the time would have taught. They always cited the ones who came before them.
Yes.
Their teachings are based off of somebody else's teaching. So they're always citing each other's work. Jesus doesn't do that. No. He doesn't cite any other rabbis. He is talking in his own authority, which it blows their mind because it's like, this guy doesn't have sources. But he knows this stuff. Where does he get this stuff? He's like, I'm telling you, because I talk to the Father.
Yes.
That's where I get my authority and teaching. And
which is the rabbis always point to other rabbis, but he only points to God.
And Jesus calls out, he says, he's not seeking his own glory, he's seeking the Father's glory. And of course, we know from the rest of Scripture that the Father is always pointing to the Son.
Yes,
and it's this beautiful, that loving relationship where it's always pointing at the other member of the Trinity. But he says that if people are seeking their own glory, have their own angle. And he's not doing that. Of course, you got to be wary of the people who get up in front of a crowd and are pointing so much to themselves, they're not pointing to Jesus. And again, that kind of goes back to the gimmicky side of ministry that, I've looked at my own life in times where I've made it more about me than it should be. And it's like, God, I just repent of those times.
Yep.
And thankfully you worked despite myself and helped me get out of the way.
Yep. I mean, I've had, thankfully, thank you, God, times in my life where I think, I have a lesson. It's like, I got this. And in my mind, I work it through. And then it's like, oh, that doesn't sound good. And then it's like this panic mode that sets in going, but wait a minute, what am I going to talk about? What can I say? And then I think that's when there have been times that I know that I come before him going, okay, you know what? I don't have this, and I'm thankful I don't have this. You're going to have to give me the words to say. And I think, I love when we start, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my hearts be pleasant to you. And I think, okay, be pleasing to you. And I think that is truly what I think about, when I come into a situation, when I'm called up to do a children's moment, when I'm called to do something in front of people, it's like, okay, you know what? This isn't me. And it's not my words. It has to be his words. And then I walk away going, oh, I'm glad I didn't go with my original plan, because that wouldn't have been great at all. And what I did was his. It wasn't mine. It was his. And the Wednesdays when I'd come downstairs from teaching, I'd be like, oh, Jesus, you got this. This is you. You got this. And it's pointing back to him. It's nothing to do with me. I'm just the vessel. I get to be a mouthpiece for him sometimes in a good way.
Yeah, I know there's been many times where I have felt so confident about what I got up to say, and I walked away and realized I don't think that landed the way I hoped it was going to land. And then the times I've walked away and thought, man, this is the worst bit of homiletical garbage I've ever preached. And that's when people are like, man, that just changed. Yep. So it's something about that just clicked for me.
Yes.
Like, I'm glad God worked despite
God
what I said.
He takes our offerings.
But it humbles you to go, it has nothing to do with you. Also, the times when people are like, man, when you said this, it just really moved me. And I go, I write my sermons down. I didn't say that.
I know, but they heard it.
That's what they heard, which makes me also very nervous. It's like, well, that's not what I said. But anyway, he's seeking the Father's glory, and the Father seeks the Son's glory. But he calls him out for the people for hiding behind Moses's law, in their efforts to try to catch him on something. And Jesus is there to fulfill Moses's law.
Yes.
And he just kind of shakes his head at him.
But again, then they would lose their standings as rabbis, as teachers, if they give into that, because then they're admitting the Messiah is here. And perhaps that's going to upend their standing in the whole courts and everything.
Well, and to your point that you made earlier, that the Feast of Tabernacles is supposed to draw their attention to what God did for them at this time of Moses, and Jesus says, "But you're not following the laws of Moses, so you're hiding behind all this, but you're not actually doing what He said for you to do." And now you're trying to kill me. In verse 20, they say, "Well, you're demon possessed." The crowd answered, "Who is trying to kill you?" Jesus said to them, "I did one miracle, and you all are amazed. Yet, because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it did not come from Moses, but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. But if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for the healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly." Well, you can't out-logic Jesus.
No, you can't. And I know, and this was... here's my question, because I always have questions about this, is, going back, I know Abraham, was told to circumcise Isaac, okay? So that was the first one as a baby. I'm assuming this. Okay, but Ishmael came before Isaac. So I guess that whole casting aside, he was firstborn.
The covenant was with
Sarah. And so
Isaac was the firstborn with
Isaac,
Sarah,
okay.
so the covenant carries on
carries
with him.
on with him.
Yeah.
And so I think, is that another rub, when for Ishmael, for Hagar, as to leave, going, we have no standing here. We have nothing. The promise is not for us.
Well, it goes back to the point, like when God makes a promise and we try to work around it.
What?
Yeah, like there's consequences
Yes.
to it. And God still provided for Ishmael and Hagar.
Yes.
But that wasn't God's plan. God's plan was to carry this out through Isaac. And so, yeah, that is the first one. Although, have you ever seen the movie Year One?
No.
It's a Jack Black movie. It kind of details like the beginning of time. It starts off with cavemen and then works its way through some of the biblical history. And it's not the most reverent movie in the world, but there's this hilarious scene where they come across Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac. And it's these two cavemen who walk up, and it's Jack Black and Michael Cera, and they see Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac. And they're like, wait, what are you doing to that kid? And they're like, Abraham's like, I'm just playing a game. What game are you playing? A little game called Bernie Cut Cut.
Oh, that's awful. It's awful. Oh.
Anyway, not the most reverent movie in the world, but every time I hear about the story of either the circumcision or the sacrifice of Isaac, I can't help but hear that line from that movie. Anyway, Jesus is like, they're about to kill me, and they're like, what are you, paranoid? Are you demon possessed? Who's trying to kill you? And then he's like, all right, guys, so you're amazed at the one miracle. One miracle. I've done a whole lot more. You're amazed at the one miracle, but you hanging your hat on circumcision and everything that is involved with the law and the Sabbath and all of that. And so he gives them for instance, he's like, you're upset that I healed somebody
on the Sabbath,
but if a child is born on Friday, the law requires that the way it works out, that the child would be circumcised on a Sabbath, which would be a Saturday. You're okay with the work of the circumcision in order to obey the law, but I can't heal a guy. So you can remove a piece from a person, but I can't bring wholeness to a person. You're upset about that. He said, do you not understand your failure of logic here?
They play the law.
Yeah. And he's like, stop judging by appearances. Stop, get to the heart of the matter. And so he's frustrated with the surface level that they're approaching this everything and judging him based off of. You want to pick up in verse 25?
Yes. At that point, some of the people of Jerusalem began to ask, isn't this the man they were trying to kill? Here he is speaking publicly, and they are not saying a word to him. Have the authorities really concluded that he is the Messiah? But we know where this man is from. When the Messiah comes, no one will know where he is from. Then Jesus, still teaching in the temple courts, cried out, yes, you know me, and you know where I am from. I am not here on my own authority, but he who sent me is true. You do not know him, but I know him because I am from him, and he sent me. At this, they tried to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. Still, many in the crowd believed in him. They said, when the Messiah comes, will he perform more signs than this man?
And so some of the crowd are picking up on the threats that the religious leaders made and wonder why they hadn't actually arrested Jesus yet. So then they're like, well, has the religious establishment ruled that he is the Messiah since he's walking around freely? Like, how can he say these things and them not do something about it?
Well, and they're questioning also his origin.
Yep.
Which, Micah talks about where he'll be from, Bethlehem. Micah points back to this, we point back, Micah will say where he comes from, Bethlehem. And so, okay, another question, as I read all of this, because I don't have biblical, theology. I don't have a class in that. Okay, so Jesus was born in Bethlehem because they had to go back into the original city to be counted. Because they're saying, no, he's a Nazarene. They
only know where he grew up, not where he was born.
And so it's like one of those things of, okay, I'd be over behind and going, Jesus, tell him where you were born. Come on, go just tell him. And I'd be one of those people going, look, you can help. You can just dispute this whole thing right here. I know where you were born, Bethlehem. Just like Micah said, but it's not pointed out here. It's like, we know where he comes from. Nothing good comes from Nazareth. That's where his hometown is. But he goes back to the original for the counting, which then tells me his brothers and sisters were probably also born in Nazareth, not to go back to Bethlehem to where they were counted. That was just happened to be where, well, not happened. It was prophesied to be where he would be born. And so out of that family, maybe the people thought, well, the rest of the family were born in Nazareth. He had to have been too. And they missed the news flash.
I saw a video recently that talked about the person with the most confidence in the room is often the quietest because they don't have to prove themselves.
Oh, I'd be over there going, just tell him. Just tell him. Tell him. Look, show me a birth certificate.
But it's amazing that, like, so God is able to use the selfishness of Caesar at the time, Augustus Caesar, who wanted to count the people so he can increase the taxes. So God used a government official trying to
get money out of
the people to orchestrate the prophecy fulfilled that Jesus, whose mother and stepfather are currently living not in Bethlehem, to make it to Bethlehem just at the time that Jesus is due, so that Jesus can say that he was born from Bethlehem. And so a lot of scholars think that this takes place at one of the festival seasons. Because a census would have run for the entire year. Okay. They have the entire year to travel to Bethlehem to be counted.
To be registered.
So why does Joseph take his 9-month pregnant wife to Bethlehem? He had the entire year to do it. He goes and times it with festival season when he's required to be in Jerusalem. Bethlehem is like just a few miles outside of Jerusalem. You can see Bethlehem from Jerusalem. And so there's so much to why Jesus is in Bethlehem for the time of his birth. It stretches beyond just the census and it dovetails into the festival season as well, which would explain why Mary is with him. Because he didn't have to bring her back to be counted. He just had to be counted.
Yes.
Anyway, all of that is to say that Jesus is like, I know where I'm from. Now, I think it's the duality of he knows that he's from Bethlehem, but he also knows he's from the Father.
Yes.
And they're just
it's obtuse
to it is. And there's so many layers to everything Jesus says. And he talks about the authority that he teaches from is also from the Father. He's like, and you would know that if you were connected to my Father, but the fact that you don't recognize that my teachings are from the Father indicates that you're really not connected to him to begin with.
Nothing is ringing a bell with people.
Which is terrifying because these are very religious people. And he's saying you have no connection with the Father.
But is there religiousness rooted in rote?
Exactly.
Do they know it by rote? Nothing's by heart. It's all by, no, this is what I was taught. This is what I memorized. I'm a good Jew. I memorized this, Torah, all of these things. And there's no heart knowledge of any of this.
And that's the terrifying part. It's the head knowledge versus the heart knowledge. And he's talking to them going, you're hanging your hat on the laws of Moses, but you don't know the God that the laws of Moses are supposed to point to.
Yes, exactly.
And for us, what does that mean? That's what I'm saying. It's terrifying.
It's terrifying. But again, and I am refreshed when I read scripture and I see something that I'd never seen before, because when it draws me in, I'm thinking, but I knew that story, and I never heard that. I never heard that part before. And I think that's where that's the living, breathing word of God, because I needed to hear something different this time. I needed to hear that nuance. I mean, when I heard about, the son, when he leaves and then he comes back and his father is waiting every day, the father comes out. I had never read, and I'm thinking, when did they sneak that into my Bible, that the father runs to him when he catches sight? And I thought, where did that come from? I have never seen that before, but I think I read that in a time of my life that I needed to know that he not only finds me, but when I make that turn back to him, that he runs to me. And I think that is what's so amazing, because you don't want to get rote and tell a story so often that it just becomes head knowledge. That connection in our heart has to be there.
It does. And it's the heart is the seat of the emotions, right? And so it's being connected with God more than just the cognitive understanding that God exists. It's being connected to God at a deeper level, and the belief and the faith and all of that is where the center of the emotions and the innermost part of your being.
It's that draw.
So it's interesting. So the crowds kind of call out the fact that, like, hey, the religious leaders haven't done anything about him yet. He's saying all this stuff. Do they believe in him? that incites the religious leaders to try to arrest him. But it's because of the crowd that they don't. They're too afraid of the crowd. They don't want to do it in front of the crowd. So that's why they eventually arrest Jesus at night when nobody's around. Will you pick up verse 32?
Yes. The Pharisees heard the crowd whispering such things about him. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees sent temple guards to arrest him. Jesus said, I am with you for only a short time, and then I'm going to the one who sent me. You will look for me, but you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come. The Jews said to one another, where does this man intend to go that we cannot find him? Will he go where our people live scattered among the Greeks and teach the Greeks? What did he mean when he said, you look for me, but you will not find me? And where I am, you cannot come. That must have blown their minds. On the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them. By this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were later to receive. Up to that time the Spirit had not been given, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. On hearing his words, some of the people said, surely this man is the prophet. Others said, he is the Messiah. Still others asked, how can a Messiah come from Galilee? Does that scripture say that the Messiah will come from David's descendants from Bethlehem, the town where David lived? Thus the people were divided because of Jesus. Some wanted to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him.
So the Pharisees are looking to arrest him, and Jesus says that he's only going to be there for a short while longer, really at this point, another year or so. And before he goes to the Father, which they can't follow him, and so they're super confused. So the Jews that lived amongst the Greeks were known as the diaspora, and so they're like, "Is he going to go live with them? Like, what is he talking about?" But it's interesting, and you really have to get into the weeds of what took place at the Feast of Tabernacles. But there's a ritual that they would have engaged in that involved a lot of water and marching around, and it says that Jesus declares this at the very last day. So at the culmination of this ritual, Jesus declares this about himself. And so it's not by mistake. Jesus is using the backdrop of this ritual around the Feast of Tabernacles to make his point. But part of it culminates in the fact that people believed that when the Messiah came, that he would provide water as he would provide the manna, just as Moses had done in the desert. He provided water for the people. And so there was the saying that as the former Redeemer made a well to rise, so the latter Redeemer would bring up water. And so Jesus declares himself as this living water, which he's using that imagery. As he said, I'm the bread of life. He's using that same type of imagery with them. And that just enrages those who are listening. But again, they're so afraid of the crowds, they won't lay a hand on him.
Well, and the difference when he has this with a Samaritan woman at the well, when he has this encounter with her, she has this draw to understand, what are you talking about? This desire to know this. It's a secret meeting he has with her, this very private meeting, and now he's gone public. And it's like this loud, he said, and it's loud. He stood in a loud voice. It's like, okay, here it comes. And I think, the mixed reactions in that crowd, the ones that just desperately needed to hear this, the ones that say, he's the prophet, he's the Messiah, because they so, like this woman, desperately wanted to believe in this. And then you have others that are like, no, this cannot be him. Again, we're going to disprove this because he can't be who he says he is. And it says divided. The people were divided, and I think it happens. We're divided in our beliefs at times, but we can't lose sight. We can't lose sight of Jesus. And me arguing with somebody else does not bring glory to him. It doesn't bring people to Christ to argue with them. I can speak Jesus. I can live Jesus, and that's the wooing. But I just love how he makes this private moment he had just a few chapters ago, and all of a sudden, here he goes, loud voice, public. I am that.
And you got to think, so that he kind of interjects himself at the end of this ritual in front of everybody.
Yes, and claims it.
And so from the religious leaders' perspective, they're outraged because he has just co-opted this high holy moment.
He's hijacked
and made himself out to be this living water. And like, that's blasphemy. Like, they look they are looking to arrest him because he just
Yes.
it'd be like in the middle of like an Easter Sunday, somebody stepping forward and finishing up the service and pointing it to themselves.
Yes.
You know, as the person running the service,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be offended. You're looking at your security detail going, why haven't you removed
Yes.
this guy? What they don't realize is that he is who he says he
He
is.
is who he said he is.
But verse 45, it says, finally, the temple guards went back to the chief priests and the Pharisees, who asked them, why didn't you bring him in? No one has ever spoke the way this man does, the guards replied. You mean he has deceived you also, the Pharisees reported. Have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed in him? No, but this mob that knows nothing of the law, there is a curse on them. Nicodemus, who had gone to Jesus earlier and who was one of their own number, asked, does our law condemn a man without first hearing him to find out what he has been doing? They replied, are you from Galilee too? Look into it, and you'll find that a prophet does not come out of Galilee. Then they all went home.
Ooh, I love that. That the mob that knows nothing of the law, you plebeians, you nothings.
They haven't been trained.
Yeah, they haven't been trained. They don't know what we know. And I think, no, they've got heart and they've got this desire for salvation. They want the Messiah. They're looking for the Messiah. That's their hope. That's where they put aside all of this law, the things that kept them from being there. Now this is the welcome. This is, I'm here for you. I am here for you. I am the living water.
When I was teaching through the Gospel of John a few years ago, I actually had somebody bring up the fact that he has a warmer reception in the Sea of Galilee region, which is the northern part of Israel. The reception he gets from the people inside the city of Jerusalem is much icier. Those are the ones who call for his death. It's when you find it is like this mixed like reaction. Or at festival season, when the people from the north would have traveled down into the city of Jerusalem. This is at festival season. You would have had a mix of a sympathetic crowd and a crowd that's not sympathetic. And that's why I think you get this back and forth between, John just says the crowd, and it seems like they're very like back and forth on him, but there's distinctly two different groups of people in the crowd. There's more than two, but there's the more sympathetic people who had seen him do miracles, and there's the people who are much more on the religious leader side who are more skeptical of him. But
it's kind of like a team Moses against, I won't say Moses, but it's like a team Moses against team Messiah.
Yeah.
But they're using Moses as an obstacle. They're using it going, no, this is the law. This is what we go by. We're good Jews. We go by this law. And Jesus is one that will fulfill that law, but they're not seeing that. And it's the ones that are team Jesus that are like, no, he's our hope. This is our hope. He's come for, this is it.
And Team Jesus is who's keeping him alive and safe from the religious leaders at this point. But the Pharisees look at the guards who would have been Levites. So these are the people who are born and raised to man the temple. They're not necessarily the priest. They can be, but they're the workers.
Yes.
But they're the guards. Why didn't you arrest him? And they're like, well, we've never heard anybody teach like him. And they're like, well, you've been deceived by him too. And
which is sad when they say we've never heard anybody teach like this. It's like,
yeah, it's a backhanded insult to
it means
to them.
that there's no passion in the teachings that have come so far. There's no hope. There's only restrictions. There's only laws. And I think Jesus speaks of love instead. And it's not anything they've heard before, which is sad. I mean, it's a sad statement of what's been taught.
And so the Pharisees, in their grumbling of all of this and the reaction, they curse the crowds who believe in Jesus. And Nicodemus shows back up. He appears like 3 times in Scripture. When he comes to Jesus at night here, and then when he helps get the body of Jesus off the cross. But John names him as one of the disciples just in private.
Yes.
An
The
inside
tide is
man.
turned.
Because they're like, none of the Pharisees have none of the religious leaders have believed in him. And Nicodemus is like, not so much. He doesn't out himself, but he interjects and says, hey, our own laws say that we can't judge somebody until we hear testimony. And they're like, well, who are you're one of them. You're one of those Galileans. And which is the derogatory. You've come from the wrong side of the tracks.
Exactly. But I think now you've seen that what Jesus planted is growing in him. You see this beautiful wooing of him because seriously, I mean, he's outing himself. he's outing himself amongst his peers, and now it's like, oh, and then eventually he will be there. So
Can you imagine the church politics or the temple politics in this instance that Nicodemus is trying to walk around? He's trying to hold his position. He believes in Jesus, but he knows it's going to ruin him and ruin his family.
yes, everything, everything, and your family is everything.
Yeah.
And you're fixing to take him down the drain with you. So his belief had to have been huge.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because again, he meets him in the dark to begin with. Jesus planted the seed in him, and who knows what all he took in after that. But he had to have been following whatever Jesus had been doing. He had to have been following it. It wasn't like, okay, I heard about him here, and I see him there. No, he had to have kept up with him. And it's like, I think he is who we say he is.
It's interesting, just to educate people, the verse numbers in Scripture are artificially put there.
What? You mean they weren't knocked in the stone?
I had a guy, good friends with him. I talked about the red letters, and I think we've talked about this before, and he was amazed that wasn't in the original text. It's like, no, your editor that you bought the Bible from, the publisher, they're the ones who determine which ones they thought were considered red letters, words of Jesus, and which ones were commentary. Same thing with the verse numbers. Like, that was put in place much later than the original text. Whoever assigned the numbers takes and ends the story at verse 53, but John 8 picks, like, it's this weird division. And I almost included John 8, but we're doing chapter by chapter.
Yeah.
We'll pick up next week in John 8, verse 1, which is a direct rest of the sentence from John 53. But they just kind of end it with, and then they went home.
And they went home.
That's a good place to call it. Let's just middle of the sentence, and then they went home.
It's a bathroom break.
Yeah.
Just stop.
On that note, that's the end of the chapter. Then they went home.
Then they
we'll
went
pick
home.
up next week. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Now, again, this is not the most familiar text, but Jesus is really he says
heart
some important
knowledge.
stuff. He gets back in with the analogy of being this living water. But the tide is shifting. This is when they're actively the religious leaders are actively trying
They know
to
they have
arrest
to do
him.
something.
They've got to do something. He's whipped the crowd into. I mean, the buzz amongst the crowd is too much for the religious leaders to handle.
And he's traveling. I mean, not this huge sphere, but he's traveling enough in influential circles to make himself known. And then the people that have seen him have traveled themselves. Word's out, and so they've got to do something. They've got to stop this. And you know, we all know where it culminates. And Jesus still has much to do. But I think, we're in this chapter is not real meaty in some ways of familiar stories, but it's that familiar thread of heart knowledge over head knowledge. At times I feel very inferior because I was not raised in church. I wasn't raised with the Bible. My knowledge is more. I was drawn into the church because of my desire to know him. Not, yes, by his word, but by his love. I needed to know that I belonged here. I needed to know that. I needed to know that he was my God also. And I think I can associate with the crowds in saying, oh, he's for us. He is a fulfillment of my hope. And I think, when I was to sit in Bible study, my first time I took disciple, I just sat there, and I know this is surprising, very quiet in that classroom because I knew I didn't have a leg to stand on. I didn't know anything. I just sat there and soaked it in as a sponge. But then I started realizing that my heart, I wanted to know him. I wanted to know him more and to dive into, why does he love me? Why does he love me? What is there about me that he loves? And I think that is what this chapter speaks of. He comes in and says, I am the living water. I will sustain you. I will give you hope. At this Feast of Tabernacles, I will be the one. I am the unity. I will point to God. I will give you this hope. And I think that's for all of us, not just the ones that, that were raised. I'm nothing. I'm jealous of people that were raised in the church because you had that advantage. I think when I came into church, I felt at a disadvantage of having to catch up.
The flip side of that is I've grown up in church my whole life. it's so easy to take the stories for granted because you've heard about them your whole life. And so the other side of it is like there's a hunger there. I mean, I have sympathy for the religious leaders because they're doing what they grew up with
Yes.
and what they were taught.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that rote memory of this is the story that we
Yes.
read and do and live out and da 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 da. And there's always that temptation for those of us who've grown up in the church. It's like, well, we do what we've always known and was taught as a child, and it can become the head knowledge apart from the heart knowledge. Whereas you come to Jesus later in life, there's an exuberance, there is a passion, a desire, a hunger for it that because you're trying to play catch up.
Yeah, I'm playing a kid. Yeah.
Versus just always having it there and taking it for granted. So there's two sides to a coin.
Two sides to a coin.
Well, friends, thank you so much for joining us. If you got a comment, leave it down below. A question, we'd love to answer it. But we'll see you next week. God bless.